decided
Yeah,
to
but two kids are teach, so here.
That's okay. So what we're going to do is I'm recording this only because this is a topic that's really of interest to many people. So what we're going to do is start. I have no idea what I'm doing here, and see how we go. So we are third in a series of 4 sessions on Shehecheyanu, and the reason I'm fascinated by Shehecheyanu is because not only do I think it exquisite bracha, one which expresses the subjective emotions of every individual and allows them to connect with God, both within the synagogue, but more specifically in the home, and we mentioned in the mall. And last week we were talking about weddings and how we're able to take a moment in our greatest days of celebration to say thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, both the bride and groom, if possible. At the same time, it's quite clear that if we study how the laws of Shehecheyanu have been recorded in the classical sources and how they've been recorded in the more recent sources, there have been shifts. Shifts not done for any deliberately bad reason, but those shifts, for a variety of factors, have led to a lack of emphasis on Shehecheyanu in day-to-day use. I'd say Orthodox Jews who wouldn't question their practice seem to lack a commitment to the Shehecheyanu bracha, apart from the occasions like festive evenings that we're going to be saying tomorrow night. I don't know many from Jews who regularly say Shehecheyanu. When they go shopping, they may rarely do so, but if you go shopping regularly for things that mean something to you, you should say Shehecheyanu. And certainly in terms of weddings that we discussed last week, it is fallen into disuse and misuse. For those who are there, let's just presume disuse, and for those who weren't there, let's say disuse. For those who were there, misuse. Misuse because some people have encouraged the idea that Shehecheyanu becomes a way to objectify the bride rather than be a means for the groom and bride to express their joy. Now tonight we're talking about an area of even greater complication. So a little introduction is necessary. In general, Shehecheyanu is an individual expression of individual joy. And we have a plural version of Shehecheyanu. Meaning, in modern Hebrew we have singular and plural, right? So Shehecheyanu is when an individual feels joyous, and we have a blessing called Hatov VaMeitiv, which is generally understood to be Shehecheyanu when more than one person enjoys that thing or that moment. So to take an example, we were talking just a couple of weeks ago, if a couple buy something for their home, and they're both happy about doing so, then they individually recite Shehecheyanu to express the fact that they bought something which brings joy to more than themselves.
Shehecheyanu?
So Hatov VaMeitiv, I just mentioned, my mistake. So individually they say Hatov VaMeitiv to say we've brought something, but because I know I'm not a single beneficiary, there is more than one beneficiary, I say this supersized plural version, Shehecheyanu bracha called Hatov VaMeitiv. That's how I understood that bracha, and truth be told, that's how most halachic decisors understand that bracha. So if you open a book on Hilchos Shehecheyanu, they'll say, you buy something for you, Shehecheyanu, you buy something from you and others, Hatov VaMeitiv.
I said Hatov VaMeitiv, my wife answered Amen.
Okay, so she answered Amen, so it's as if she said the bracha herself. She has the right to say Hatov VaMeitiv herself, meaning you were both happy.
Okay.
But fundamentally, by choosing to say Hatov VaMeitiv, you're saying, I'm not the sole beneficiary of the pleasure enjoyed by this purchase or through this moment. Any questions about that? This is going to be incredibly important. Now, let's begin with teaching from the Gemara. In source 1 we have, as I say, quite a lot of material. And the Gemara is from Brachot, Nun Tef Amud Bet, 59b. And it says as follows. I'll just read it for a moment. V'hatanya, and it's being taught in the Braita. Now, here on the page are discussions about Shehecheyanu and Hatov VaMeitiv. Meaning, we're trying to kind of figure out what is the difference, between these two blessings. And the presumption is Hatov VaMeitiv is a bracha where more than one person is happy about a particular event. Amrule, they said to him, Yalda ishto zachar. Your wife has given birth to a boy. So, Omer Baruch Hatov Ha'metiv. We are told that the husband should say this blessing, Hatov Ha'metiv. Now, the question is, why is he saying Hatov Ha'metiv when his wife has given birth to a boy? And the answer is given, Hatam Nami here too, the Ika Ishta Behedya, the Nichale Zachar. Basically, his wife is also happy. You buy something in which more than one person is happy with the purchase, it's for more than one person. Then you say the bracha Hatov Ha'metiv, a wife gives birth to a boy, the husband says Hatov Ha'metiv, and in so doing acknowledges the fact that his wife is also happy. That's the first source. Any questions about that source? So let's see how it plays out in the Shulchan Aruch. Source number 2, Yalda ishto zachar. If his wife gave birth to a boy, Mevarech Hatov Ha'metiv, then he says Hatov Ha'metiv, V'gam hi tzricha levarech ken. She too should say the blessing. Meaning, this isn't he just needs to express his joy, she too should be expressing her joy. In fact, by choosing Hatov Ha'metiv over Shehecheyanu, we are presuming, expecting, and relying on her to be joyous. If she's not joyous, she said, I hate that kid, right? Then he should be saying Shehecheyanu and she should be doing whatever she wants to do. Now the Rav Moshe Isserles adds in his gloss, Hagar, Im meita ishtoi beleidata, if his wife, God forbid, dies in childbirth, Mavarech Shehecheyanu, he says a Shehecheyanu blessing, the ha'leka hatav achwini, because there's no second person who's going to be joining him in the joy of the birth of the child. And similarly, if the husband dies before the child is born, so it works both ways, right? Shehecheyanu is a single person with single joy. Hatov Ha'metiv is any person expressing collective joy between themselves and other people from whom is enjoying this moment, this purchase, this child. And he goes on to say, some people say that we don't say this blessing, and quite literally, there are those who are lenient about this blessing, because Shehecheyanu is generally viewed to be not an obligatory blessing, but a blessing which is optional by the person. I can choose to say Shehecheyanu, and what seems from that remark is that people didn't say this blessing that often. And he goes on to say, and from here it seems to be that many people who perfectly well could be saying this blessing aren't saying this blessing.
The word kula is strange, right? It's a chumrah, it's a chashash for bracha levatala. It's this conservatism again.
Maybe. We're presuming the concern is bracha levatala. It goes back to our session last week and the week before. I think that part of the challenge of Shehecheyanu is because it's subjective joy. People, they may well have said, I'm in theory allowed to say this blessing, but they liked somebody telling you what to do. The idea that I get to say when I say the blessings, I get to be the quantifier of whether I'm joyous enough, actually is unnerving. Shehecheyanu is unique. I am the posek for my own joy. I am the decider as to whether I should be saying the blessing. And both in the previous case of purchasing new items, which we saw 2 weeks ago, and even we mentioned in certain discussions relating to weddings, the disuse of Shehecheyanu isn't necessarily because of bracha levatala, but people just didn't know, should I, shouldn't I, I'll just leave it. It could be because of a halachic concern. It could also have just been because nobody was conducting them, nobody was encouraging them, nobody was instructing them and saying, say the bracha. When people give birth to a child and they come to shul and they say Hagoimel, it is encouraged, if not instructed. This is what we do. But it seems to be not doing that in terms of Shehecheyanu. So since we don't seem to be doing it, it's not done.
I was taught that, we have to say certain amount, this is like NCSY education, you're doing a certain amount of brachot a day.
Mhm.
So if you could figure out that you could somewhere say a Shehecheyanu, you're kind of chalking out. So
Nice.
I mean, you don't just do it stum, but you're not going to do it over the groceries you buy, but you put on your clothes,
Mhm.
or something like that. It's a time to say it. We were taught you can't say it for shoes, you can't say it for underwear, things like
Right.
that. It was very specific, but you put on some new clothes, and that's the time to say it. And
So those
it's
distinctions we talked about 2 weeks ago, how come shoes shouldn't be the receiver of Shehecheyanu and underwear? I mean, maybe I particularly like the underwear, or maybe I love those shoes. So there seems to have been a shift from subjective feelings of if you're happy, say the bracha, to creating measures for when you can or you can't.
Right.
And that's been reflected in all the other conversations of Shehecheyanu. But it's a lovely idea that people are encouraging people to say Shehecheyanu. I don't hear it as often as we should.
It was safer that you were excited about.
Right.
Like that,
Sure.
So
Beautiful.
it could be anything nice, but it was the idea of doing it. We were told not in shoes because you put your shoes on and
No, the Ramah
muddy
mentions
right
it.
away.
Yeah.
Or what about if you put them on and you were in mud? You don't want to say the bracha as you're putting them on.
Uh-huh.
So.
Uh-huh.
So
it could well be that there's a tradition as to why we wouldn't say Shehecheyanu on shoes, because shoes made of leather come from animals. There's been a anguish leading to the production of this product. That's one of the arguments offered by the Ramah.
Question way back then.
So what we have here is a Gemara. It says you have your son, you say Hatay v'hametiv, and the Shulchan Aruch says so should your wife, and the Ramah says if God forbid one of the couple dies, then you only say Shehecheyanu. And he adds by saying, seems to be many people don't do this, or he's clearly emphasizing they could be doing so. I can't quite say they should be, because it's a birkat reshut rather than birkat chova. Shehecheyanu is an optional blessing, not an obligatory blessing. Now, there is a question which we haven't yet raised, which is the language of the Gemara and the language of the Shulchan Aruch, because it seems only to be talking about the birth of a boy, and that makes people wonder. In fact, it's going to make us wonder for some time this evening. And we need to ask, is this to suggest that this blessing shouldn't be said on the birth of a girl? Girls are children too, right? In fact, we know that, at least according to the theory of having children, one fulfills the mitzvah of peru'uruvu, be fruitful and multiply, by having a boy and a girl. So the girl counts for something, right? The girl makes it on the list. Now, I have a tremendous bias. I only have girls, right? But in particular, if we see and acknowledge girls as being children, which we do, and the Tanakh does, and the Talmud does, there's no question about that. Is this silence to suggest that if a girl is born, this same blessing shouldn't be recited? Now, we're going to first see an argument of the Rashba, because the Rashba's argument is going to force us to take a second look at Hatay v'hametiv, and in doing so, defend why a daughter wouldn't be the recipient of Hatay v'hametiv. When I say recipient, meaning upon the birth of a daughter, why the father and mother wouldn't be saying this blessing. So I'll tell it to you outside, and then we can read it inside. According to the Rashba, Hatay v'hametiv isn't simply the plural version of Shehecheyanu. It is Shehecheyanu in plural plus a further quality. And that further quality is what we may well call utility, or what I've phrased as functional pleasure. If Shehecheyanu gives singular pleasure, and we thought Hatay v'hametiv gives plural pleasure, the Rashba says Hatay v'hametiv actually must give functional pleasure for the blessing to be uttered. Meaning, I can only say the blessing if there's a kickback, not just merely a sense of pleasure. Let's see what he says. He says, "Lo b'chol davar sheneneh hu v'acheri mimo mevarech hatov v'hametiv." He makes it clear, we don't just say hatov v'hametiv on things that you and others get pleasure from. He goes on to say, "She'im ken afilu akra chadata yivarech hatov v'hametiv." Then even on a new gourd, like on a piece of vegetable that you are sharing with others, you may wish to say Hatay v'hametiv, which the Rashba thinks is ridiculous. Just because two people are gaining pleasure from something doesn't mean that you should be saying Hatov HaMeitiv. You'd be saying it all the time.
But the same thing with Shehecheyanu.
The same thing for Shehecheyanu, you're right. So he thinks that Hatov HaMeitiv is a far greater level, a far more rare, special blessing than just a plural version of Shehecheyanu. He says, and how I've translated this is, it has to be something which has both a function and provide pleasure to him and to others as well. He says, and the Gemara has been given examples of Hatov HaMeitiv, Kagon Yiridat HaGshamim, when it rains and there's been an absence of rain for a long period of time, and it rains and everyone's happy, we say Hatov HaMeitiv. There are multiple beneficiaries of this rain. Yerushat HaKrovim. When, for example, you and others receive an inheritance, then you'd say Hatov HaMeitiv. He even says, if you're having a special wine and you are enjoying it with others, then that would be appropriate to say Hatov HaMeitiv. By the way, I think...
Number one.
Sorry.
If I'm sitting myself, I take one wine and take a better wine.
Okay, so that's a slightly different
I see. That's
category of wine. But then he goes on to say, he says, just by looking at nice fruit, just having that pleasure, that's not Hatov HaMeitiv. It must be talking about a functional pleasure. And this is a key point, and we're going to be coming back to this Rashba. He says, upon the birth of a son, the husband and wife, the parents, have a functional pleasure. Chada, firstly, because sons provide a staff in their hand and a spade for their burial. Meaning, sons provide sustenance for parents when they are alive, and they bury their parents when they die. But furthermore, because a son is like an additional limb of a mother and father. And it's a way of people to yearn for descendants, to make sure they have people to perpetuate not just their DNA but their name.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So what the Rashba said is something very significant. Hatov HaMeitiv isn't just a plural version of Shehecheyanu. It's in fact when the person for whom you're saying it, in this case, upon the birth of a child, does things for you. A son you can count on to make sure that he pays your electricity bill when you haven't been able to do so. A son you can count on to arrange your funeral. And a son you can count on to perpetuate your memory and your name. And the implication is, a daughter you can't. Now the Rashba lives in here the 13th century.
Yeah, why won't she perpetuate your name?
Yeah, usually
Remember, we're not talking about surnames now. So in the 13th
Precisely because, well, they may not have had surnames, but she becomes...
So she'll name her child.
But I guess that is pertaining to the time. For one, I mean, my father's thing was, you know, when I had a brother, unfortunately passed away. I had another one too. My father was like, he's my Kaddish boy, we used to call him.
Right.
So I guess, you know, time-wise, this is kind of the thing that came. You know, you have a son, you know somebody's going to be there as the Kaddish for you when you're gone. So to me, this is kind of like...
It is, so in a modern version, it's a son to say
right.
Kaddish.
So, you know, like, I mean, he perpetuated that he
Right.
heard from his father, and it was probably from that, because he had 3 sisters, and then when he was born, quite a few years later, my Zadie was like, you know, whenever you talked, it's like my father would walk in, oh, my Kaddish, you know, like,
Right. Okay.
So I guess, you know, maybe that was something that, you know, was passed down that thought, and it comes from this, but when we have to put it in the time frame, because I mean, a lot of times nowadays where it used to be a son took on in the parents, now it's more likely the daughter, because you could have a daughter-in-law that doesn't want to take in the in-laws.
Right.
I for sure
Right.
would never have taken that. Then again, I'm not taking my father either. So, but anyway, but you know what? You know, more likely for a daughter to say that.
Right.
So I guess it's that. But
So, however, whether we speak about this remark as being historically, contextually understood, what he is saying is, boys do things. He doesn't mention girls, but he's being deliberate and explicit about boys. He says, boys are providers, boys are arrangers, and boys extend the family name. Now we could quibble with this Rashba, but he's done two things. He's firstly given us a sharpened definition of Hateva Meitiv, which we may well accept or reject. The Rashba was a Go'on Otzim. When I say we may well accept or reject, I don't mean me, but of course the late halachic decisors. So he's given us a sharpened definition, which we may well wish to adopt or not. But secondly, he's given us a rationale as to why the Braita, the Gemara, and why the Lord Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention girls. He says Hatova Meitiv doesn't apply. She's not going to give them things. She's not going to bury them. She's not going to be an extension of their limb. Hatova Meitiv just doesn't apply. I mean, quite literally, it's a Rashba was saying here, and we could say, isn't it sexist? There's a difference. He'd say, no. Hatova Meitiv is there to describe a functional pleasure. A daughter can give pleasure, but she's not able to fulfill the functional pleasure that a son can provide. And since she can't, no bracha should be said. Now,
Sorry, when did he live?
at the bottom there, you see,
Oh,
you've got his
okay.
birth and death date.
Okay.
So 1235 to 1310. Any questions about the Rashba?
Yeah, well, lucky he's not alive now in the room.
Lucky he's not alive now. Right, what will we do for the Rashba? Okay, the Rashba did a
Your
lot
wife
for
would
us.
join me in this one.
That may be the case. Okay, so there are one of two ways to understand the Rashba. Option A is, he's a halachist, he's telling us the definition of the halacha, and he's describing what sons do and what daughters don't. He doesn't mention daughters, as I say, but there's no question. This is the implication. Option B is, he's making a very clear statement about gender perception. Okay? It's not about gender function, it's about gender perception. Meaning, in simple terms, is he saying this is how the blessing is used and men meet the cut, boys meet the cut and girls don't? Or is he saying boys are more important than girls? The way I've interpreted the Rashba is a former. But we can't ignore the fact that there are some remarks in the Gemara that say otherwise. And I'm quoting these not just for kicks, but because the Netziv is going to quote them and the Tzitz Eliezer are going to quote them. So these are important. If we look at 4 Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, we have 3 Gemaras. The first one, from Baba Batra, informs us that a daughter was born to Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, and he was disappointed. You know, if you have even me, I tell people I got 5 daughters. They say, never mind. You know, Be'ezus Hashem, you'll get lucky soon. And you think, what are you talking about? So Rabbi Shimon had a daughter, and he was disappointed. His father said to him, increase has come to the world. But Akapara said to him, your father's given you an empty consolation. Because the world cannot do without either males or females, yet happy is he whose children are males, and alas for him whose children are females. Ashrei lemisha bonav zchorim, oiloi lemisha bonav nekevis. This Gemara, which isn't necessarily a halachic statement, it's an opinion of those at the time, is drawing a very clear hierarchy. Boys are better than girls. Right? The next Gemara makes the same kind of claim. Is referring to the beginning of Parashat Tazria, where we're told that a woman remains impure for 7 days and upon the birth of a son, and for 14 days upon the birth of a daughter, and later on brings a korban. Why does she bring a korban? Because we say that she made a shvur, she made an oath of, and now we're going to have kids again. Or she also may well have said some pretty nasty things to her husband, like, you got me in this mess, I can't believe it. Anyway, after 7 days, she sees her son, she thinks, well, you know, that's all water under the bridge. He's a son. According to the Gemara, it takes her double the amount to get to grips with the fact that she's got a daughter. Again, it's a pejorative statement about females. The flip side is the third Gemara, where we have Rav Chisda, who says, Bat chila siman yafa. If her daughter is born first, it's a good sign for children. And some say because she rears her brothers, and others say because the evil eye has no influence on them. Rav Chisda said, right? To me, however, daughters are dearer than sons. He says, I love daughters more than sons. Meaning I have more pleasure from my daughters than my sons, or from having daughters than sons. What we hear from these Gemaras is that there is a struggle as to understand really gender roles and gender value. I wouldn't say gender equality because we're not talking about what people do. Or maybe we are talking about gender equality, especially in light of the fact that we're not talking about what people do. It's, are boys as good as girls, right? Gemara 1 says, not a chance. Gemara 2 says, not really. Gemara 3 says, some people say yes, some people say no. Let's now look at source 5. Source 5 is in Netziv. Netziv's commentary in the Gemara, Meremes Hadeh. And he's trying to make sense of the Gemara and the halacha that we have, that we say, Hatov Ametiv on the birth of a son, and the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch are silent about the birth of a daughter, implying, although not explicitly stating, that one shouldn't say this blessing when a daughter is born. So what says in Netziv? He says, he says, it says in the Mishnah that when you buy new things, you say the blessing of Shehecheyanu. He says, well, now this is the unwritten piece. We know that we don't say Hatov Ametiv on the birth of a daughter, but I suppose maybe we should say Shehecheyanu on the birth of a daughter. Because having a daughter is no worse than buying yourself a slave or a maidservant who can help you out a little bit. She can do the dishes, right?
So she's a slave.
I didn't say that, nor did he say that. He says she's no worse than a slave. If you want to get really aggravating. Sharei Maseh Adad Aviha. And he says, because there's a rule of thumb, which is a daughter who earns money until she's married, the money goes to the father. So she provides in some way or another. He says, fundamentally though, I haven't heard that idea in the poskim. So he's thinking out loud, maybe on the birth of a daughter you should say a blessing. Maybe you should say Shehecheyanu, because having a daughter is no worse than buying a slave. And don't forget, there are financial kickbacks of having a daughter. Then he says, Ulai yesh lomar. He says, perhaps not. Why? Because having a daughter isn't really a great gift to the father, as the Gemara says, and he's referring to sources 4 Aleph and 4 Bet. Meaning, he makes an argument that at least you should say a blessing, a Shehecheyanu blessing, and then he says, yeah, but some people would even say having a daughter, even if she earns money, even if she's as good as, or no worse than a slave or a maidservant, she's too much of a headache. She's not really a joy. No, I can't know, forget about it. It's as if he takes the draft idea and then at the end of the piece crunches up and puts it in the waste paper basket and says, no, I don't think they're going to buy it. I'm not even sure if I buy it myself. So where we are is, there is, until this point, or we're going to look back a little bit, an unwritten distinction between men and women. Written in the Gemara, but not quite written in the Gemara relating to Hatov Ametiv, not quite written in the Shulchan Aruch, but is understood that you don't say the blessing with girls. Nobody said you should say the blessing with girls. It emphasizes boys. And the Rashba, in explaining his rationale of Hatov Ametiv, is very emphatic that this is what boys do, and this is not what girls do. And when the Netziv conceives out loud, maybe you should say Shehecheyanu with a girl, he in the end says, no, we shouldn't. Now, if the evidence that this gender difference, gender inequality, isn't clear enough from the Gemara's remarks and from the final comment of the Netziv, let's see what the Shulchan Aruch Harav and the Aruch HaShulchan says. The Shulchan Aruch Harav, by the Balatanya, writes, Ala Shmua, he is referring to the birth, if you hear that you've had a daughter. Ala Shmua einu mevach klum she'eina shmua tova. Upon hearing that his wife had given birth to a daughter, he doesn't recite any blessing because it's not good news. That's it. I mean, I'm pretty careful about translating. I think eina shmua tova, you couldn't get clearer than that, right? And
you don't teach these sources in Machon Mayam.
I was thinking about it, yeah.
no, I don't. This is, we're trying to make an argument here, we'll see. And the Aruch HaShulchan is perhaps the most explicit, that when discussing the whole question of Hatov Ametiv, he says two things I want to draw to your attention to. It says, Yalda ishtoi zachar, his wife gave birth to a boy, Mabach hatov hametiv. Then you say hatov hametiv. So that's the Gemara, that's a Shulchan Aruch. Shizeo tov alo, because this is a good for him, v'gam tov ala ishto. And his wife is happy with it as well. Shgam hi ratzona yoter v'zachar. The Aruch Shulchan makes point number one. Women want sons more than daughters. Okay. And he goes on to say, he says, you can say this blessing whether you were there at the birth or you were in a different city altogether. And you hear the news, you can say the blessing. And she too needs to say the blessing like we saw in the Shulchan Aruch. So now he's making it explicit. But upon the birth of a daughter, now he's living not ages ago. He's living 100 and something years ago. But on the birth of a daughter, ein mevarchim, no blessing is recited. Lefisha ein bezeh simcha kol kach shebezachar. Because there's not as much simcha on the birth of a daughter as there is for a son. And then he goes on to say, ve'ein chilek ben kiem piri v'rebia oilai. Makes no difference whether you've got a son and a daughter, you haven't got a son or a daughter. Ve'gam ein chilek. And then he goes on to say, it makes no difference whether you're actually happy about having a son, or you're not happy. Meaning he actually says that Taiva Meitiv isn't so much about the joy, it's about that sense of utility. He seems to be basing himself on the Rashba, right? He says there's no joy in the girl and she has no utility. And the boy, I don't care so much if you're happy or not. Since he's a boy, since he's the hierarchy of creation above the girl, and since he's probably going to provide, understood like the Rashba, you say the bracha.
This goes back to the issue you've been talking about, the
Yeah.
Objectifying the bracha vis-a-vis the spontaneity of feeling.
Right, so ironically, in a source which is hard to swallow, you see a strong evidence that even Hatov HaMeitiv, which I understood to be at least an emotional blessing, he's even saying, I don't care if you're really happy or not. So the Aruch HaShulchan is perhaps the most explicit statement that A, the law doesn't apply to a daughter, B, that he actually claims that a mother always wants a son more than a daughter. Again, some of these remarks are not sourced. And C, even if the husband isn't so thrilled about having a son, he's got 4 sons, he's done with boys, he has another son, you still say the bracha. It's very difficult to understand from any definition of Hatov HaMeitiv, right? Because if it's a definition of the Rashba, you shouldn't have been talking about simcha, you should be talking about earning. And if it's a definition of simcha, then the last remark that if he's not so happy, shouldn't have been present. Either way, the interpretation of Shehecheyanu is convoluted. Now, I am nothing compared to Aruch HaShulchan, but from everything I've understood from these brachas, this paragraph requires a little bit more interpretation, what we call tzarech iyon, or I'd say tzarech iyon gadol. Requires us to explore it a little bit more deeply. Just take a pause for a moment. So what we see from here is a plethora of sources based on a Gemara in brachas and elucidating a law in Shulchan Aruch that says there's a bracha called Hatov HaMeitiv. It tells us that when something happens, when a purchase is made, or when a child is born, and there's more than one beneficiary of that person, if not, it's just emotional beneficiary, but perhaps even financial beneficiary, Hatov HaMeitiv is recited. And from all these sources, it's clear that we say it for a boy, we don't say it for a girl. And a variety of reasons have been given for why we don't say it for a girl. The Rashba's one is, this is just the rule of Hatov HaMeitiv, and girls aren't earners, girls aren't buriers, girls aren't extensions of your family. That's in many ways a much more cold definition, defining Hatov HaMeitiv in a unique way. Others don't quite go in that direction, but they emphasize the lack of joyousness upon having a daughter, like the Shulchan Aruch Harav, and the Aruch HaShulchan seems to be saying both that and something else altogether, not entirely clear. So far, so good?
Well, not so good, but.
So far, these are our sacred books. These are our tradition. And if we don't get our tradition, our job is to struggle, to grapple, to figure out, and to search. And we're going to see some sources which perhaps are less well known, but I think should be better known. Now, a turning point in this entire sugya is the remarks of the Chofetz Chaim, author of the Mishnah Berurah commentary. And he says, like the Netziv, with a slightly different rationale. And he says, I'll tell you it out loud, and we're going to see it in the text. If you have a daughter, it may be you don't say Hatov HaMeitiv. Don't forget the reasoning of the Rashba. The daughter may not be an earner, the daughter may not be a barrier, she may not be an extension of the family. But there is simcha, there is joy. At the very least, you should say Shehecheyanu. He says, I tell you what, if I saw a friend who comes through the door right now and I haven't seen them for 30 days, I'd say Shehecheyanu. I can imagine that the joy of seeing your newborn daughter is at least as good as that. That's his comparison. Let's see it in the text. Zachar, a boy. He says, from the fact that the poskim stated that without specification, it's clear that you'd say Hatov HaMeitiv even if it's your third, fourth, or 12th son. Right? It implies even if you're having a daughter, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Pruvu, even if you've got your sons, you're waiting for the daughter to get the team to fulfill that mitzvah Pruvu, you don't have Hatov HaMeitiv. Mikol Makom, nevertheless, Nirali says, it appears to me pashut, quite clear. There were Pam Rishon, that on the first instance, that when you see her, meaning your daughter, you should say Shehecheyanu. Because this is certainly going to be no less a celebration than seeing a friend who you haven't seen for 30 days. But Sameach, he says, you are happy, obviously. Sameach b'riyatoh, joyous seeing her. You should say Shehecheyanu. Now this is known as a chiddush of the Chofetz Chaim, because until this point nobody said precisely what he said. The Netziv said something very, very close, but he based it on the rationale of buying a slave rather than seeing a friend, and he also rejected it at the end. The Chofetz Chaim says, if you have a daughter, say Shehecheyanu. It's a happy occasion. It may not be suitable to say Hatov HaMeitiv, but certainly it's correct to say and invoke the name of God and say thank you. For many people, this is a landmark ruling. And for many people, this is both a very logical, bold maybe, courageous possibly, but it's a chiddush. He says something that until this point hadn't been said. Now, following on from the Mishnah Berurah, a number of people either did do this or didn't do this or challenged this, and there was discussion about the ruling of the Mishnah Berurah. Now, some people may well say, I don't think he's gone so far. Surely there should be an equivalent blessing for boys and girls. Surely we should be saying Hatov HaMeitiv for a girl. Before we get there, let's just ponder the implication of the Mishnah Berurah as found in the response of Rabbi Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer. He's asked about this blessing. Should it be said? People challenge him and say, the Mishnah Berurah doesn't sound like he's entirely certain. If it's a doubtful blessing, maybe best not be said. So the Tzitz Eliezer makes it clear. Number one, I stand with the Mishnah Berurah. I believe he's correct. He then goes on to say that the Shehecheyanu blessing is unique, that even when we're in doubt, if we are joyous, then we should say it, because it's a subjective blessing. So Tzitz Eliezer concurs with our general understanding of Shehecheyanu and supports the ruling of the Mishnah Berurah that on the birth of a daughter, you say Shehecheyanu. That's what he says. We could read it, but I'm aware of time, so I don't think we necessarily have to, and you have it here to take away, and hopefully the translation conveys what the writing says. Moreover, I mentioned the past couple of weeks Rabbi Chaim David Halevi. Sorry?
It's interesting. He made me aware. Sofek brachos lahokel. That's the use of lahokel that I commented on before.
Yes.
You see, it's...
Of course, right. Lahakel there means best not be said, and Lashon Ramah is, it is then makel not to say, I suppose. Rav Chaim David Levi, he actually wrote two sets of response, one called Seder Chorav, and the more recent set, some of which was published posthumously, was Maim Chaim. And because I've mentioned him in the past few weeks, he was also asked about this ruling, and he says the Mishnah Berurah makes sense, and what he's trying to do is come close to a comparison with what we do on the birth of a son, within the confines of the definition of Hatov HaMeitiv, which seems to be inapplicable to a girl. So all they're doing is echoing, they're kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's about areas which perhaps weren't explicitly addressed by the Mishnah Berurah. So let's just review where we're at right now. Really, we have four models of what we do upon the birth of a daughter. Model A is not what we do, but why we do what we do. Model A is we don't say Hatov HaMeitiv because a daughter is less important than a son. There's no question that some people have said that. Shulchan Aruch Harav has said that, Aruch HaShulchan has said that, and it's understood from the Netziv as well. Option B is a Rashba, who says we don't have Hatov HaMeitiv because it's inapplicable to a girl, because a girl isn't the urn and the barrier and the extension of the parent. Option C is the Mishnah Berurah's Chiddush, which is, yeah, right, we don't say Hatov HaMeitiv for one of those two reasons. He does quote the Rashba in the Bir Halacha, so it seems to be he's going in that direction. He says, but you should say Shehecheyanu. And numerous people concur with him, provide support for him, etc. Just before we go on, I want to just bring to your attention the Piskei Teshuvos. Piskei Teshuvos is a super commentary. It's really a super commentary on a super commentary on a super commentary, because the Mishnah Berurah isn't just a commentary, it's a summary of other commentaries too. But Piskei Teshuvos is a contemporary work written by a man called Rabbi Simcha Rabinovich. I haven't written his birth date, I don't quite know what it is, but his volumes that continue to be produced. On source 11 he discusses this. I'll just read it to you because I want you to understand how people deal with the Mishnah Berurah's ruling as is. So he says, we read before that the rulings of the Ramah, that many people are lenient about these blessings. They often don't say them when they could / should, or if should is really appropriate here. He says Sfaradim don't say these blessings. These blessings do not mean Shehecheyanu on a girl, meaning Sfaradim don't even say Hatov HaMeitiv on the birth of a boy. The whole question is not done, it's not addressed then. And so too, there are certain Ashkenazi Jews who don't say Hatov HaMeitiv even on a boy. So why is that? It could well be for halachic reasons. It could well be that they didn't like the fact that there was a dissonance between boys and girls. We'll never know because it's an argument from silence. He says, and about that ruling of the Mishnah Berurah, who says he should say Shehecheyanu on a girl, I don't see many people doing it. He's about to say, I'm not saying it's wrong. He said, I just don't see many people doing that. He says, those who do say these blessings, as long as they are filled with joy, then they're doing fine, they're doing a good thing, and they should be blessed. So he says, number one, some people don't say these blessings, they fall into disuse. Number two, especially the case of saying Shehecheyanu on a girl. But those who do say Hatov HaMeitiv, and those who do say Shehecheyanu on a girl, they're doing fine. He wants to make it clear these are not weird peripheral and overly liberal rulings in either case. He says though, what do people who don't say these blessings do? How do they express their thanks to God when they have a son or a daughter? He says, He says, rule number one, when you're saying benching, and there's a blessing Hatov HaMeitiv, think about the fact that you got your son or your daughter. It's a nice idea. I didn't actually look in the footnotes. Most of his ideas are sourced from elsewhere, and he writes these summaries. So I have it here. This is not his idea. So, you can like it or dislike it, but Rabbi Simcha Rabinovich isn't the author of that idea necessarily. It's referenced elsewhere. He says some people bench with kavanah on their kids. I think it's a nice thing to think about your kids when you're benching, but to think that you're thanking God for your kids when you're benching, having had Pizza Hut, seems strange. Then he goes on to say, when your son is born and he's having a Brit Milah and they're saying Shehecheyanu, if you didn't say Hatov HaMeitiv, it's nice to think more broadly about the fact that you're happy to have a son. And then he goes on to say, and about a daughter, if you haven't said the Shehecheyanu that the Mishnah Berurah said is okay to say, then al yedei achilat pri chadash or malbush chadash. If you're having a new fruit or you're wearing a new piece of clothing, think about the fact you've got a daughter.
I know.
It's terrible.
Isn't it?
It's
Do you have
terrible.
daughters?
It's so trivial.
Correct.
Do you have daughters?
I have 2 daughters and 2 sons.
Okay.
And my daughters are astounding women.
Right.
And it's just this.
Right. So this
Like
statement.
It's like the story with Chachora that we talked
Right.
about last week.
This statement is again. I'm not speaking badly of Rabbi Rabinovich. He's collated this. I'll quickly just tell you the reference. But the notion that through having an apricot,
I know.
right,
Yeah, that's what got to me is the way he
or wearing
wrote
a nice shirt would be sufficient expressions of
Right.
saying thank you to God for giving you a child, which you genuinely
A daughter.
value.
He
Sorry,
specifically said
so
a
a daughter.
daughter,
I'm sorry,
right?
man.
It's one thing
Right?
he said about his
Yes,
son and
yes,
daughter,
yes.
but right.
Is very, very
Disgusting.
strange.
And he's pretty modern time. It's not like
He is not. He's pretty modern. He's modern, right?
and
this book is in every base of
But
medrash.
he's nipped, I know, isn't that? I don't know when he was
published
nifter or
within
when.
the last 20
No,
years.
that's what I'm saying.
This
Like,
one's
I remember
published
the
in the
name.
past 5
Yeah.
years. 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we wonder why our boys, our yeshiva guys, turn to be a bunch of sexist.
Right.
Right?
So
Right? If this is being in every big medrash and these are the things they're learning, right? You won't teach it to your girls because you know they're going to freak out, and yet the boys are learning it. So
that's why we're talking. So not only are we grappling with the dissonance in the halacha, which is rooted in the Gemara. It is in the halacha that we talk about boys, and the later commentaries make it clear we're talking about boys and not girls. But here, in trying to offer a way forward to people who do neither, so that's not coming from a place of necessary gender bias, but the solutions are, I would say, downright offensive, right? They are halachic solutions, nobody's questioning that. But as I've argued on numerous occasions, the fruit and the piece of clothing are often not suitable stand-ins for the right Shehecheyanu, and I'd rather people say the right Shehecheyanu than think that you can redirect your emotions towards a fruit or piece of clothing. We spoke about that specifically in the first week. We spoke about that in the second week as well. And the more we understand Shehecheyanu, the more we will almost never use this roundabout route. This roundabout route exists when necessary, but it's kind of one of those things where the rare cases become the norm. And you read this and you say, how can you even write such a thing? Now let's deal with approaches. We have about 7 minutes, and this is the most sophisticated bit, so I'm going to go quickly. Okay, 8 minutes then.
did Rashi call
Can you
it?
give him another few minutes?
Yeah, of
Well,
course.
not of any meaningful
Where
one.
do you live?
Or no, I'm fine.
So can you give him another?
So I'm not-
You're the one who
I'm not in a
back
rush.
to
I'm not in a
everyone
rush.
else, so-
So let's now look at really 3 responses to this question. 3 responses from contemporary thinkers and poskim. So this course wasn't advertised, although I suggested maybe it should be, as modern Orthodox approaches to halacha. So for some people, the Mishnah Berurah, his ruling is exquisite, innovative, palatable, and delightful. And for those people, that's totally fine. And if you understand the Rashba literally, What Mishnah Berurah is saying is, you can't say Hatova Meitiv, you can't say Shehecheyanu, you should say Shehecheyanu because girls are valuable too. Lovely. However, not just, but certainly, those who identify themselves as being, sorry?
The Mishnah Berurah doesn't address that, does he? He doesn't say because girls are valuable.
He says that there's simcha. He said
no worse than seeing a friend.
He says no worse than seeing a friend in terms of the model, but his lashon, because it's important to validate it. He says, but samech riyato, meaning he doesn't echo the Gemara in Bava Basra or the Gemara in Nida. He doesn't talk like the Shulchan Aruch Harav or the Aruch HaShulchan or even the Netziv. He says there is simcha.
Why am I happy to see you after 30 days?
Okay.
It's not a value statement. It's a subjective
You're right.
expression.
One could argue that in the entire thing, but the Netziv says, the Aruch HaShulchan says, all mothers want sons more than daughters. Everybody's speaking subjectively. So he's saying, in the world of subjectivity, I'm prepared to say girls bring a measure of simcha. Maybe that's not going to be everybody's experience, but I'm prepared to say that's going to naturally be many people's experience. And by the way, that distinction is noted by the Tzitz Eliezer and those kind of things. You can have a look through those. So, how do modern people grapple with this if they say, I think Hatova Meitiv should be said for both boys and girls, and if we don't, we're making a statement about boys being more important than girls, which is wrong. Rosh Hashanah commemorates not the creation of the world, it commemorates the creation of humanity, Adam and Chava, each of importance, right? We need both. The implication from everything we've said is, we need both, but one is more important than the other. From what many people say, certainly those who belong to modern Orthodox camp, to imply that one gender is more valuable than the other is intolerable. And so the question is, how do you move forward in this conversation? So here are three models, each pretty much reaching the same conclusion from slightly different directions. Approach number one is offered by Rav Nachum Rabinovich, who is the Rosh Yeshiva in Ma'aleh Adumim, and explained in an elegant manner by former Chief Rabbi Sachs, who was a student of Rav Nachum Rabinovich, based on a Rambam on which Rav Nachum Rabinovich has not just written a commentary, but is pretty much the world expert. Now, what does the Rambam has to say about this? We didn't mention much from him. Let's have a look at source 12 Aleph. The Rambam defines Hatova Meitiv, and he says, Amrlo Meis Aviv Yerushu, right, when it said to him his father's died and that he is his heir. If he has brothers, then you say Hatova Meitiv, after he said Daina Emet. If he has no brothers, you say Shehecheyanu. The Rambam concludes with a klal, and the klal goes as follows: Kitzu shel davar, kol davar tova shehu lo v'la'acherim v'ach hatova meitiv. Anything which there are multiple beneficiaries or pleasure receivers, hatova meitiv is said, and v'tova shehi lo levadei, when there's a single recipient of joy and benefit, Shehecheyanu. The Rambam understands the difference between Shehecheyanu and Hatova Meitiv the way I began, not the way the Rashba does. That's important, right? The Rambam doesn't say much more about this. And he doesn't quote the halacha that we started with, the Gemara in Brachos, or the halacha in Reish Chav Gimel about having a son. Meaning the Rambam is silent on this entire sugya of what blessings you say with boys and girls and that kind of stuff. Now, Rav Nachum Rabinovich, in his...
Can I just say something? So one reason why the Rambam is that before we learned that the Sfardim don't say it, right? So to him it might have been a non-issue.
Maybe.
Right?
You're right. When it says...
Sfardim or don't take it to him...
Sfardim don't...
If it would, then it's not a point for Rambam to even discuss it as a non-issue because...
I'm slightly frowning because although that kind of makes sense, the Shulchan Aruch was written by Rav Yosef Karo, who one would argue is the greatest Sephardic authority. When the Piskei Teshuvah says Sephardim, it means nowadays. He's speaking, everything he says in here is a kind of a nowadays perspective. So nowadays it's not done. I wouldn't say it was never done. In fact, I'm going to claim quite strongly it must have been done. Maran of Yosef Karo wouldn't have written otherwise. So Nachum Rabinovich basically says Rambam doesn't mention this halacha whatsoever. And what does that tell me? So I'm going to summarize, although say Rabbi Sachs, the way he says it is just so elegant that maybe we'll read from him in a minute. Nachum Rabinovich says if the Rambam doesn't codify this law, and by the way the Rif also doesn't codify this law, it means he doesn't agree with this law. Or he said the Rambam takes a view that if you're happy individually, you say Shehecheyanu. If you're both happy together, you say Hatov Ha'metiv. And now I'm not going to tell you what that means, because only you can tell you what that means. The way Rabbi Sachs explains it is when his first daughter was born, he was troubled with this dissonance. He went to ask Rav Nachum Rabinovich, I'd like to say Hatov Ha'metiv, but at the moment the only thing on the halachic cards is the option of Shehecheyanu written by the Mishnah Berurah. What are my options? And he was explained by Rav Nachum Rabinovich the fact that the Rambam is silent on the issue. And he says the following, and I'll read from halfway down the paragraph from page 7. Again, I'm skipping, but it's here, right here for you to look through. From a wonderful essay called Creativity and Innovation in Halakha. He says, without hesitation, he declared that it was his own belief that in such a case, one should make the blessing of Hatov Ha'metiv. According to Rav Nachum Rabinovich, you can say Hatov Ha'metiv if you have a daughter. He explained why. Any occasion on which the Rambam doesn't codify halakha, explicit in the Bavli and unchallenged elsewhere, calls for explanation. Yet that was a case with the halakha at hand. There was no reference in the Mishnah Torah to the Braita. Instead, Rambam merely codifies a general rule of whatever is good for oneself and others, you say Hatov Ha'metiv. Whatever is good for yourself, you say Shehecheyanu. So how do we understand the Braita? He says, how do we understand the initial Gemara? It could be taken in two ways. First, it could be an independent law in its own right. It could, as it were, be a halachic stipulation that in this event, unlike the birth of a daughter, demands this blessing. Meaning, when a son is born, you have to say this blessing. Alternatively, though, it could be merely understood as an example of the kind, that's a typo, kind of event that is good for oneself and others. The Braita chooses this example because it is uncontroversial. Elsewhere, the Gemara discusses whether daughters evoke as much delight as sons. Some said yes, some say no. Do you remember we saw that? All then could be assumed to take delight in the birth of a son. Not all could be assumed to feel likewise. Meaning, you can read the Gemara in one of two ways. Option A is you say it in this case and you don't in that. Option B is you say it, and here's a case which everybody's going to agree that we say it in, because everybody's happy on the birth of a boy. The Braita is an example of a general rule, not a new law. Therefore, he does not codify it. It follows that if both father and mother are delighted at the birth of a daughter, if it is good for oneself and others, they make the blessing Hatov Ha'metiv. He says this seems to be a good example of a chiddush ba'alacha, an innovative ruling, in the sense that despite the fact that the subject it addressed was almost as old as the human situation, it gave a ruling that had not been given before. So Rav Nachum Rabinovich basically says, I say Hatov Ha'metiv on the birth of the girl. How so? I interpret the Gemara is giving us a case where Hatov Ha'metiv certainly should be said, but there are lots of other cases too. And the Rambam gave us license at any time two people are happy about a moment in their life, or purchase in their life, that they're both joyous, say the blessing. That's Nachum Rabinovich. That's his commentary on the Rambam. That's Rabbi Sachs explaining it, chick-chack. Option B. Option B is from a Baruch Efrati, a Rosh Hashiva in Efrat, who writes an essay on this topic in the journal Machanayich. And he says, how do I deal with this? I'm going to read it in Hebrew. I didn't translate this in the next one because they're technical and slightly longer. He says, even if you accept the perspective of the rabbis of the Talmud that don't see joy on the birth of a daughter, this has no halachic weight. About our discussion, for two reasons. Reishit, point number one, these remarks about which gender is most important are non-legal, agadic remarks, and we don't derive laws from Agadah. Rishenit, and secondly, Basis achiv shel birkat Shehecheyanu hu al simchat adam. Goes back to the whole point we've been saying throughout this course. The whole notion of Shehecheyanu is rooted in the subjective joy of the person. Ne'er often subjectivity. If you didn't think that he said that in Hebrew, he uses the word subjectivity, which, if you could work out that Hebrew, you're great on him. Gam im mibchinot acherot lo ra'il ismach hazeh. And he says what comes out from this, Shavadai sheyesh levarech kayom et birkat Shehecheyanu. He says certainly say Shehecheyanu. He affirms the Mishnah Berurah and kind of puts lots of lines underneath it and says this is something you really should do. Im samech b'holadata, if you are happy with her birth, which one presuming you are. Zot va'od, he goes on to say, moreover, yesh svara, there is an argument to be made. A great argument to be made. Of saying today Hatova Meitiv or Haladat Bat on the birth of a daughter. Lokule Alma. In all cases. Why? Reshit, point number one, if we say that Hatova Meitiv is rooted in joy, certainly if you're happy, then say the blessing. Meaning, if you take the simplistic definitions of Shehecheyanu Hatova Meitiv, you should be saying Hatova Meitiv. Sheinit, he says point number two, and now this comes back to the Rashba. Gam le Rashba v'siato, both the Rashba and those who support his position. She'tzricha to'elet musha hasimcha b'kedei levarach she'atova meitiv, who required what I described as functional pleasure, hatova meitiv, to be expressed. Kayom bat mesayet lehorea lo pachot mibein. Nowadays, girls help with parents as much as boys. Heim ba'avadat habayit, both in terms of home, b'bchinat dahav leichut liyada, heim b'tzachik v'ratam, also in terms of burial. He says, girls do what Rashba says, only boys do. The world's changed. Meaning, the Rashba may well have been a defense for not saying Hatova Meitiv on a girl for hundreds of years. I can use the Rashba to defend it. If that's what you need to say Hatova Meitiv, all these daughters can do it as well. He provides a summary from the slightly longer article, but the third and final point of his summary is from an analysis of the reasons of the Thanksgiving blessings on the birth of a son, it seems to be that nowadays one should say the blessing Hatova Meitiv even on the birth of a daughter, not just because you're happy for her, and secondly because she supports like a son. So model A to find equivalence is that of Nachum Rabinovich. The Rambam didn't invoke this halacha. Given that, you can understand the Gemara as not being a unique case, but just a clear example. The clear example is Hatova Meitiv is whenever you have an individual or an item that brings pleasure to more than one person, so you can say Hatova Meitiv on the birth of a daughter as well. Option B, pathway B, is that of Rabbi Efrati. He says two things. If you insert Hatova Meitiv as just being the plural version of Shehecheyanu, you're happy on her birth. Presuming you are. And if you understand it like Rashba, girls now help. Financially, physically. Meaning, gam b'gam, you should say it. The third approach is by Rabbi Benny Lam, down the road. And he says some of the ideas of Rabbi Efrati, but he goes just that much further. And he says, Al Pia Sibot Shemevia Rashba. He says, if you look carefully on the Rashba, you can see the Rashba becomes a linchpin. Because whilst you can like the Mishnah Berurah, in order to argue that Hatova Meitiv should be said for a girl, you either need to say the Rashba is wrong, and the Rashba is too great for us to easily say he's wrong, or you need to reinterpret and reapply the Rashba's ruling. He says, regarding the rulings, the rationale offered by the Rashba about the birth of a son, nearly it seems to be Shetzach Levarach Hatova Meitiv Gam Holadatava. Then you should say this blessing also on the birth of a daughter. He gives 4 reasons. Reason number 1, remember the idea of being there in life and burying them in death. He said, this idea is found in the Talmud Bekesh Latana Isha Shum Bekeshet Get. Now this is a fascinating argument. He says, The Rashba takes the approach that only boys help parents, only boys bury parents. But if you look in the Gemara regarding a woman claiming a husband that she should have a get, and she says, I haven't got a seed from my husband, I haven't got a child, seemingly. Even though a woman is not necessarily commanded on a mitzvah peri v'rivya, she still can say, I want somebody to be there for me when I get old. Meaning, a parent's desire is to have children, not just because they want to have pride, but because they also want to have support. This claim that I want to have a get because I haven't had a child with my husband, because he's not providing for me in my later days, is expressed in the Shulchan Aruch. But there, the Bet Shmuel, one of the commentaries in Shulchan Aruch says, if she has a daughter, her claim cannot be sustained, because daughters are there for mothers, daughters are there for fathers, daughters are there for them in their lifetime. So, point number one of Rabbeinu Lau is, there's a halacha elsewhere in the laws of Gittin that undermine the rationale of the Rashba. The Rashba says, he doesn't actually mention daughters, let's be clear. He says, sons provide for their parents, sons bury their parents, sons are extensions of their parents. In Hilchas Gittin, we have a proof to say, daughters can be that. If that's the case, you can say, Atayv Meitiv. That's answer number one. Answer number two, where he says about the continuity of the name of the family, there seems to be only a result of having a son. He says, he says this phrase, Ben Yerach Avaim, a son is a limb of the parent, is discussed here in relation to a fetus. I'm not going to go so much into it. Fundamentally, he's saying this is a nice idea, but in actual fact, it doesn't imply that a girl cannot do that. It's discussed in many ways in reference to inheritance, that a son inherits parents, because according to traditional Torah law, girls don't inherit. But as he said, in the modern day, we find ways for a girl to inherit. So, I wouldn't say he debunks that argument, but he says that argument isn't strong enough to support the idea you only say Hatova Meitiv on a boy, not a girl. Number three, he says what we were already thinking about at the beginning of our learning. You can't ignore the fact of the social context and their attitudes towards giving birth of daughters, b'yamim in those days, and sometimes even in our day. And he says, but this is not the case in our generation or in our communities. He says, look at how we celebrate bar mitzvahs, look at how we even celebrate the birth of a girl with Zevet Habat, which is a girl naming ceremony which is done, I wouldn't say deliberately to contrast the Brit Milah, but people have parties for having girls. He says girls are important to us. Maybe they weren't so much then. The world's changed. And he says lastly, Al Pi Kol Ha'amur, based on all this, and especially understanding that שהשמחה על הולדת בן ובת אינו מוגדרת בהיררכיה ברורה כבעבר. The birth of a son and daughter is not rooted in a gender hierarchy that there may have been in previous generations. ולכל משפחה יש את משאלות הלב הגלויים הקסומים. And that every family have their own private feelings, meaning I may well be yearning for a son, I'm not, but imagine that, right? So that could be more important to me. There could be others who are yearning for a daughter. I mean, simcha is a subjective thing. But since there isn't a hierarchy, since it's subjective, he says, it seems to me, you can instruct a father or mother who desire, they should say Tova Meitiv even for the birth of a daughter. So you have really three modern approaches. Approach number one is from the Rambam, Rav Rabinovich, meaning the Gemara and the Halacha aren't limiting. We have a general rule, and we can base on our general rule the possibility and the permissibility, Yisah Tova Meitiv, even on the birth of a daughter. Option B is Rav Baruch Efrati, who says, oh, even Tova Meitiv is like Simcha, you're happy. Or it's like the Rashba, girls' roles have changed. Ben Ilau takes that idea and extends it further. He argues there's another Erev Shulchan Aruch that suggests the fact that girls do what boys used to do, and the fact that the notion that boys are extensions of parents is a philosophical idea, but not necessarily a practical one, and where it is practical, girls can be that too. And there's a social context, etc., and we celebrate girls. So those are three approaches to this question. There was an article in Tradition in 2011 discussing a lot of this. It was structured in an interesting way. I didn't quote from it much, but I think the summary is lovely. So Sharon Siegel says the following. Today, many parents feel tremendous joy upon the arrival of a newborn daughter. In addition, a daughter is now as beneficial as a son from a practical standpoint, earning, provision, etc. Unlike in medieval or even more recent times, daughters today work outside their home, financially support their parents and their immediate family, bury their parents and inherit from them. Therefore, two key issues impacting the question of whether parents may recite Hatova Meitiv on the birth of a daughter are the extent to which the personal emotions of parents and the material benefits that will ultimately accrue should be taken into account. These issues dovetail with the more technical points of how to interpret the interplay between the Gemara's general rule and the Braita's specific cases, which is what Rav Nachman Rabinovich discusses, and how to construe the relationship between Hateva Meitiv and Shehecheyanu, which we've been discussing this evening. In some, modern societies are left to determine how to interpret the Gemara and when to consider contemporary attitudes in resolving whether the parents of newborn girls may give thanks to the God of the universe, who is good and causes all good. So we summarize it in a nice way.
These three approaches.
Right, in a very, very beautiful, elegant way. What do I learn from all this sugya? This is my third case study of Shehecheyanu, spilling over into Hatova Meitiv, and whether that really is just, let's say, the plural version of Shehecheyanu or something a little bit more. In case number one, in talking about new items, I made it clear that there is a trend towards measuring joy, which does a disservice to Shehecheyanu, and I think significantly detracts our connection to God in our day-to-day living. I mean, I'm speaking there not just from a halakhic standpoint, from actually a spiritual standpoint. If we're not saying the brachas that are given to us in order to reach out, connect, and celebrate our relationship with God, we are losing. Hashem is less palpable in our day-to-day lives, and this bracha is meant to do that. In our second week, I talked about how customs are often misunderstood, and that can lead to, often mistakenly, profound misrepresentations of Jewish values, what I called objectification. Here, when talking about boys and girls, we have a text. And the text is in our face, right? It says, if you have a son, this is a bracha. And we're not quite sure what to do with the text. There's no question that for centuries, many people understood it as a statement of gender hierarchy and made pretty remarkable observations about how we value and how we celebrate the births of daughters. And those have shaped how we live. And some people, it's a very disheartening fact. Notwithstanding that, what do we do in our generation where we see inherent worth in both genders in equal measure? We either say we celebrate the ruling of the Mishnah Berurah, Shehecheyanu, there's no question, there's a lot to be said about that, and that's affirmed by the Tzitz Eliezer, and you may well think surprisingly also affirmed by Rav Chaim David Levi, for whom this would have been a hot topic, but he says, I think the Mishnah Berurah got it right. Other people, though, say no. I want to find a pathway where Hatova Meitiv can be said for both genders. That's, of course, a choice whether you want to take that pathway. But there are three routes. One is from Nachum Rabinovich, Rabbi Sachs, based on the Rambam's silence and giving the general rule, in which you say Hatova Meitiv as Hatova Meitiv. Say it as you wish. The Braita wasn't excluding anybody. Option B is Gam V'Gam. Either it was or it wasn't, but nowadays you can say it because the role of girls have changed. Option C, Benny Lau, is taking that idea and saying, if you read into the Rashba every point he says, which implies that girls shouldn't be the recipient of a Tova Meitiv, I think today they should. And it's really up to Parsec to figure out which. But here we see an interesting clash of values expressed through halachic texts, different approaches, and truth be told, creativity in each of them. And where people say, contemporary rabbis aren't creative, here we've got them. Here we've got Menachem Rabinovich, Efrati, allow each in their own way answering an important, hard question with integrity rooted in the halachic tradition. And it's been a pleasure to share these ideas with you. Next week, the last topic is looking at Shehecheyanu on celebrating the modern state of Israel, Shehecheyanu on Yom HaAtzmaut. I wish you Chag Sameach, Shana Tova, Ktiva Chatima Tova.
Enjoy my baby.
Enjoy.
Enjoy.
Very